Ronald Reagan was the 40th president of the United States from 1981 to 1989. If you don't know Ronald Reagan, well, you probably shouldn't be listening to this show. Nonetheless, Ronald Reagan's legacy, while alternately shining and in dispute, remains an essential one. So we're lucky here at Dirty Moderate to speak to someone who will know all too well, not only about Ronald Reagan, the president, or Ronald Reagan, the governor of California, but Ronald Reagan, the dad, Ronald Reagan, the human being. That's his son, Ron Reagan Jr., the son of former President Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan. I'm here to talk with Ron today, and what I call a deeply personal interview about everything from what it means to what it meant to grow up Reagan, to talk politics, to talk religion, to talk about his very poignant memoir, which was published in 2011, called My Father at 100. Of course, we will discuss the Republican Party's moral and philosophical collapse into autocracy, lies, and thievery under Donald Trump, something that I don't think either of us are proud about, to say the least. So thank you for tuning in and enjoy my interview with Ronald Reagan Jr. Ron, so good to have you.
Well, good to be here.
I'm really glad. I mean, I feel like there's so much to talk about, not the least of which are a few books which have come out, I think, reappraising your dad's legacy. But I want to start with your book, okay, which my Amazon indicates I purchased in 2011. I have no memory of this because I remember every book I read. So I had the opportunity to read it again. And I one of the things that stuck out to me about the memoir, just to start, was a line I think that you wrote, it looks like in the introduction, and you wrote this: the Ronald Reagan with whom everyone is familiar could not have existed without the Ronald Reagan he rarely let anyone see. Mm-hmm. That's really beautifully said. Let's talk about that.
There was a sort of inner self that he had that wasn't accessible to virtually anybody, and maybe not even fully accessible to himself. He was one of the least introspective people you would ever want to meet. He just did not navel gaze. And if you asked him to try, he would sort of react with confusion as if he didn't really understand what you were getting at. I remember an interview he did with Barbara Walters after he'd left office, and he was doing it with my mother. And Barbara, as was her wont, asked him a sort of probing question about feelings and states of mind and all of that. And he got this kind of quizzical look on his face, and she registered this and then turned to my mother and said, "He doesn't have any idea what I'm talking about, does he?" He said, no, he doesn't.
So which was that interview? Because your book obviously talks about these realizations, which were, you started to think about, well before he was even in his second term, but became deeply personal and painful for you. Was this late 80s when you thought that maybe he was already succumbing to Alzheimer's? Or was Barbara just confused because he was opaque and just didn't?
No, it wasn't about Alzheimer's in that interview. It was just that she was asking him to do something that he, at any age, would not have been inclined to do. And that's look within and sort of soul search and regurgitate, feelings that he might have. He was, the man was born in the Edwardian era.
Yeah.
One of the themes of the book is this guy is literally, if not technically, but literally from a different century. And that this is, he's practically pre-Freud, not just pre-Oprah.
Yeah.
Guys of his age just didn't sit around and share their feelings a lot,
No.
They just got on with it.
There was a moment in the end of the book that was very moving, though it does speak to how certainly men like my grandfather was born in 1918, was the same way, and he lived a long time too, where your mom had breast cancer and Ron, or your dad, ended up sobbing uncontrollably in the arms of a nurse because, as you put it, he wouldn't have felt comfortable doing that with another man, which is he is not singled out for punishment when I say that. I mean, that's just the way it was.
Too, but it's just that the doctor actually at the time sent a nurse in, realized he was just crushed by the fact that his wife was in surgery for breast cancer, and sent a nurse in knowing with a nurse, he could soften up and be human. He wouldn't feel he had to hold it together, for the guys. So that's what happened. The nurse has never spoken about what happened in that room. One surmises that he broke down in some way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think also the book, provides a wonderful historical context to your point about being born in the Edwardian era. Although I don't know if people in Tampa, Illinois would have referred to it that way, but I like that term. The idea that you're sort of depicting an America, right, especially, which you referenced several times, that goes from the horse and buggy era to the automotive era, and what that was like. I mean, that's such a key tenet of industrialization and radical transformation in our society that I love that you pinpoint, because it explains, right, not just specifically Ronald Reagan, but it does explain how somebody of his era would view the world. Coming from a very humble beginning in a non-industrialized world mainly. I mean, it's not quite agrarian, but it's certainly nothing like it became. And how that informed his view of the prairie and the small town and things he often romanticized in his political and public life.
Yeah, I mean, it really was a long time ago.
Yeah.
When you think about it, he heard as a young boy the first public radio broadcast, KDK Pittsburgh, come in, and this seemed like magic to them. That there was this little box, and voices were coming out, just plucked out of the air, were coming out of there. There was, of course, no television. Movies were still silent and black and white. But automobiles were just becoming a thing at that point. He was born in the midst of what is probably, arguably, I'm not a historian, but I will say that the greatest technological transformation the world has seen since we mastered fire. That late 19th century through the, let's say the 20s, the 30s, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just astonishing, telegraphs, radio, television was at least thought of back then, even if people didn't have it in their homes. Air travel. I mean, there were suddenly airplanes, not just balloons you sent up, airplanes. And of course, automobiles, of course, transformed our cities utterly. If you go back and look at old photographs or even newsreel of cities before the automobile, they were completely different places, utterly different. There were no traffic laws, for one thing, of course. People just went even when cars showed up, people just went any which way they wanted in the street. People, horses, cars, carts, trolleys, just kind of mixing at random,
Right. The reason I bring it up too is one of the things I talk to people a lot on the show and off the show. We will never see the kind of transformation people will often assert like we would see from AI. We've never undergone anything as radical, to which I always say, I think you just need to crack a history book. I mean, you don't know what that might have been like. I mean, that was not AI specifically, but it's an analog to a world witnessing its entire center of gravity shifting.
AI, of course, depends on electricity. There was no electricity in the late 19th century for most.
I know. You mentioned that how you could look at how the lamps were burning at night in vast regions of the center of their country. There was right. Yeah.
His birth town, Tampico, Illinois, was actually a little ahead of the curve. They generated their own electricity using the nearby Hennepin Canal to spin a turbine and give them some electricity, which I can imagine was sort of a on and off sort of concept there. Of course, everybody had oil lamps too, because you couldn't really count on the electricity. Different world.
Different world. I mean, and in the world we're in, so to give you a little bit of the background also of my interest in all things Reagan, I was born in 1974, and so I came of age during your dad's presidency. And of course, I was too young, obviously, to be able to wax eloquently about, Latin American policy or the Contras or anything like that. However, growing up at the time I did in a Democratic family, when at the time that I was a Democrat until 5 years ago, I'm an independent now. I have to say that your father's gauziness and his view of America and the self-confidence he made everybody feel, and the optimism that we had in that period of people our age was really infectious. And he seemed like a leader, you know, and I don't say that to say he wasn't, but it really doesn't matter because that's what he appeared to be for people as citizens. I always say, you know, you relate to people for different reasons. And he almost feels like the last great leader, in my opinion. And again, if I was a voting age in 1984, would I have voted for him? I don't know. I mean, I don't know that, you know, I am no fan of Jimmy Carter, so I don't know I could have voted for him. You know, Walter Mondale seemed like a perfectly lovely guy, but also hapless. I mean, I guess I bring this up to say that so much of my political education has been about, you know, people in a liberal environment just blaming every single thing on your father, which I think is, by the way, reductive and silly. I think you yourself have many disagreements ideologically with your father, but that does, I mean, you know, there's this sort of weird sense that history only began with the Reagan era, and here we are. We're going to, of course, get into to Orange Jesus, but you know, how I know that you're a son, but I mean, do you know where I come from? How that affected people almost in a nonpartisan way? I think that you can't put too much of a premium on that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, yes, I disagree with many of his policies, particularly when you think about the environment and things like that. Some things we did see pretty much eye on. His approach, particularly at the end towards the Soviet Union, of course, and Gorbachev. You know, I had the privilege of attending the Geneva summit as a correspondent for Playboy magazine.
That's right. Yeah.
I had some inside track, so I was able to actually get in the room.
By the way, for listeners for our young listeners, yes, Playboy was a incredible repository of great intellectual thinking and interviews. I mean, people even know what Playboy is. For those who are listening, it was not just a smut magazine. It had a lot of gravitas. No, it did. I mean,
it had a good editorial section at that point. Yeah. So we disagreed a lot. But the thing you had going for you with my father, whether you agreed or not with his policies, was that you could count on him being a pretty sterling character. This was not a guy who, you know, went out of his way to lie to you. He was a decent human being, and that's something we've in recent years have gotten away from in the presidency in a rather shocking and frightening way. And it doesn't seem to matter to a lot of people either, which is I like to humanize things, and I like, let's say, journalists who also play that game, because you can't separate the office from the man. You might try. Yeah. You might respect the office, but not respect the man, but they're occupying the same space. And the character of the person, they've all been men so far, but the character of the person in that office is important, is very important. You know, you can see it with a guy like Bill Clinton, who, you know, very effective in many ways.
I liked his president. Yeah. Yeah.
But, you know, at a certain point, you begin to realize that, okay, there are some characterological issues here that, you know, are a little troubling. And I'm not even just talking the kind of, you know, unfortunate age difference kind of, you know, president with the internet. The lack of judgment that you know, demonstrated was just astonishing. So anyway, I just mentioned that as an aside. You know, that was, of course, nowadays that seems so sort of innocent and clean, you know, when you compare it to Donald Trump, the orange turd.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it a few times, and I don't know who you were speaking with because I didn't recognize this person, but somebody made the outrageous leap on one of the YouTube shows that I saw, referencing your father and Trump and how you should be basically said something to you along the lines of, well, you know, you're a son of a famous Republican and Trump is now there and you should be in line. And you said something which was wonderful, and you get my father's name out of your mouth. I don't know who this person was. I'm sure you've said it many times. It was great. I said, you and I aren't going to have that kind of interchange, but damn, that was good. But it gives me no pleasure as someone who is really nonpartisan. I really have, even through my life. I mean, I lived in New York for a long time. So, for example, I voted for George Pataki always as governor. He was a sort of old-time Rockefeller Republican. I had no problem with that. I've never been on the left per se anyway, so it wasn't a huge leap. I am certainly not on the left now, but I'm not on the right either. And again, those things. What's that?
I'm on the left, so I balance you out.
Yes, you do. I know you're on the left, which I love. But I also think that those terms have come to mean different things. But I know that apart from, of course, being Ron Reagan Jr., it can't give you any, because I know it doesn't give me or anybody who's just a decent human being any, I guess any optimism almost. I don't know if that's the word, to see that the Republican Party seems almost incapable of holding itself with any firm boundaries when it comes to the rule of law, norms, our values, the Constitution, and not just Trump. All of his coddlers, all of his enablers. And that is a huge, for people who hate Republicans always, do you really hate Lincoln and Grant and Eisenhower and Teddy Roosevelt and your dad? I mean, that's just, I'm sorry, that's not the same thing as Trump. And I know that is obviously something you're probably asked about all the time, but it's something I just can't get over.
Well, no, it's not Trump. Trump is sui generis. We've never had a president we've had presidents who had their issues, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I mean, Nixon was, a troubled guy.
Yeah. A smart guy, though, with real policy prescriptions.
Yes, but actually wanted to do something and thought about particularly foreign policy.
Oh, yeah.
A great deal was a real, encyclopedia of sort of local precincts and all of that, too. He was a real politician's politician at that point. I think we have trouble in this country, and it extends into the mainstream media a great deal. Simply recognizing what we're dealing with here, and that is certainly a sociopath, likely a psychopath. And I don't say that, to call names. I mean, this is observable now. And I say, likely a psychopathology, obviously that would require a real diagnosis. Sociopathology, on the other hand, is evident. It is in the way he behaves. Anybody with half a mind can observe that this man is clearly sociopathic. The way he treats his family, the way he treats people around him, the way he lies constantly. Lies about things that are, you remember his first day in office when he became obsessed with the crowd at his inauguration and sent a poor, hapless Sean Spicer out to defend the notion that he had the biggest crowd that had ever assembled in the Washington. When you've got aerial photographs demonstrating conclusively that's not true, as if it matters anyway. But, it's this kind of stuff, but we have trouble, I think, in this country just calling a spade sometimes. That it seems pejorative. Well, I guess it is, but it's also realistic.
Right.
The man's a sociopath. He's a danger to our. He tried to overthrow the government.
Never should be forgotten.
In fact, we all watched it happen on television. And he's saying he'll do it again. So when do we just say enough?
I mean, one of the things, enough. Yes. I mean, I can't believe we're going through Trump 3.0 here, or the attempt.
Because the Republican Party will not say to him, enough, leave. We don't want you anymore. No. They're saying, they know his base is their base potentially. And without him, they're like, they can get primaried. And the only thing that matters to somebody like Marco Rubio or Lindsey Graham is that he can show up on Meet the Press on Sunday. Without that, they cease to exist, apparently. It's a sad thing. The roots of this extend quite far back, though. I mean, you go to Nixon and you've got the Southern strategy. Frankly, you go back farther than that. You've got, the opposition to the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, and all that. You've got Goldwater and people like that. But it progressed, and eventually get into the 90s, and it's Newt Gingrich who now weaponizes, who starts they're the enemy kind of thing. But that sentiment was there even earlier, even before Newt Gingrich sort of said it out loud. I remember people, not my father himself, and not most of the people who were around him, but there were some of the more hardcore people that worked in his campaigns who really, you understood that their sentiment was, if we lose, it's not legitimate.
Yeah.
Democrats cannot be the legitimate governing party, just by their very nature.
Right.
And now nobody was saying, so we should, we should oppose a peaceful transfer of power. But there was just this vibe of, we're the only ones who ought to be in charge. Screw the elections. It's, we're the rightful owners of the White House, basically. And that has now transmogrified, of course, with Trump into something far darker and more defined, shall we say.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the MAGA movement, which has come to manifest the idea that policies don't matter, okay? And to the extent they matter, and this is another problem, because when I say that, I want to qualify it by saying, the descent of for me, ideologically, it's the descent of the Republican Party into sort of this weird quasi, we like big government, sometimes angry populism, borrowing now protectionist policies from the left, aiding and abetting tyrants when it suits them, and not in the ways presidents used to. We always, the United States wanted Pinochet and Somoza and these people, I know, and the Shah, yes. But, Jeane Kirkpatrick rightly argued that some dictatorships are better than others. And that's a different argument for a different show. But
our son of a bitch.
Our son of a bitch, yeah. And I think that's right. And I think sometimes U.S. interests, geopolitics is sordid, to say the least. But now there's no governing philosophy. But one of the things that is prevailing, to the point of what you probably noted in some of the hard righties back in the day, was own the libs. Mm-hmm. Anything that they say has to be so bad that we'll oppose it. So if that means getting in bed with Vladimir Putin, we'll do it. Yeah. Getting in bed with Viktor Orban, we'll do it.
Look how upset all those thoughtful people are when you do something like this. When we push through Charlotte with signs saying that Jews will not replace us, look how upset those liberals get at things like that. Yeah. Right. I never feel owned by the MAGA people. I feel contemptuous of them. I feel sometimes confused as to who are these people who seem so dim that they can't see through the guy who's right in front of them. But it becomes tribal, as you pointed out. That's the owning the libs part. It's just, if they're for it, we're against it. That's it. But the other abandonment, though, that I think that I really believe, and maybe this was sort of when I was, feeling attached a bit to the Reagan era and being a Cold War kid, but also the idea that we are absolutely going to throw away the idea of peace through strength. Okay. We're not going to govern that way. Okay. We're going to govern by deciding who, is putting forth not peace through strength. Let me add something. Not peace through strength as a philosophy for the United States, as a bulwark of defense and smart geopolitics. Not only are we getting rid of that, we're going to go with Viktor Orban and other people because their attacks on LGBT people or whatever they may be, that'd be good. That would be a good blueprint. Yeah. So we're not only going to get in bed and cozy up, we're going to be kind of our own American autocracy, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to do away, with the great achievements of, and again, we're in a very different place with Russia, but of what the Cold War represented, that democracy and freedom and liberalism, as in a classical sense, I think is the best way. I mean, I really do believe that. I think that there's really been no alternative. Well, Churchill always says it's the worst, least form of government, whatever the quote is. But all the others. Yeah.
Yes, except that is true. I don't think that anybody's pining. I think today's campus left might be, but I don't think anybody's pining for communism. I mean, not anyone who's lived under it. So, and that again, that doesn't mean, we're nuanced in this show. That doesn't mean that social programs shouldn't exist and the government should die. I mean, that's also, but MAGA doesn't believe that. Trump isn't running on really gutting the social safety net. He's running on hardcore social policy and nativism and fear and deportation. It's not the sun in Ronald Reagan's face has been completely obscured by some very dark clouds.
Yeah, that's true. I think too that this whole notion of now of conservatism and liberalism left and right has become kind of pointless, not just because of Trump, but I think it's those terms. While we can agree that, well, okay, liberal means this and conservative means that on, I don't know, taxes or something like that. What does it really mean to be, for instance, I spent half my time in Europe and in Italy, where, all the countries have universal health care.
Yeah.
Or does that make them leftist or liberal?
Right.
Or does it make us the only developed country on earth that does not provide health care to its citizens? Just kind of a weird outlier. It's not conservative or liberal. It's just kind of dumb.
Yeah.
But and there are other things about that. Is it conservative or liberal to be concerned about climate change?
Right.
Kind of realistic, it seems to me. We're talking about science, physics, things like that. I don't know that maybe nature has a liberal bias, as we say. But so I don't find those terms all that useful anymore. But I will say that you mentioned Viktor Orban, and of course there's Trump's good friend Vladimir Putin and all of that. We're, aside from climate change, which is an existential threat to the human race, not the planet, by the way, that'll go on, but the human race, the other real challenge we have is authoritarianism versus democracy.
Yeah.
And authoritarianism is a lot easier than democracy. Democracy is very new. Authoritarianism, very old. Democracy, we weren't really a full democracy here in the United States until the 1960s and the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah. And I was going to segue with that, an important thing, which I know we can unpack. So, well, first of all, you obviously, as you know, and as a guest, it was the last sort of stand of that party of Lincoln, but you wouldn't have a Civil Rights Act or Voting Rights Act without the Republican Party. Yes, LBJ signed it, but not with the help of Southern Democrats, which historically were the party of white supremacy. And that obviously switched, we know. And a young Gerald Ford was a congressman, a young Bob Dole, all voted for civil rights of 64, voting rights of 65, fair housing of 68. That's what you did in lily white districts. I mean, Russell, Kansas, I don't think had any black people. I think they had one Jewish family, and it was the Specter family, I think, from what I understand. But so this is not like some haven of leftism, right? However, one of the things that I'm always, and maybe I've got a bias towards your dad. I know he was against at the time the Civil Rights Act, and from kind of, but in a way that Goldwater was, I don't agree with it. However, there was this sort of states' rights idea of the government. Don't put the government in the way of what people can do. This is what I ask you, your dad, based on what you've written and based on everything I know, I mean, wasn't that just a kind of, I don't know, naivete on his part of where we were? Not a bone deep racism. I mean, I would, no.
I never heard him use any racial epithet.
No.
Very upset if he heard any of his children use something like that. But I think too, along with that, having grown up in the horse and buggy era, you have to realize that, through well into the 70s, actually, certainly in the early 60s, white people in America, in a decisive majority, whatever they thought about civil rights and legal rights and things like that, generally speaking, did not think that they were the same as black people.
Right, of course.
72% of people in the early 60s said that if black families moved into their neighborhood, they would want to move.
Right.
72% of white people.
Oh, yeah.
Almost 3/4 said they would move if, several black families moved into their neighborhood. So it was a different time. And I think we sometimes misjudge history because we look at it through the lens of the present and our present sensibilities. But back then, back then on television or in movies or in public, you could make fun of gay people.
Oh, well, that's only changed recently.
Yeah, I mean, it was no big deal. The American Psychiatric Society still listed it as a disorder. and so they fair game. The epithets and the stereotypical kind of stuff. So this is all pretty new, but like democracy, this is all very new, and it's very fragile. I mean, democracy requires, you remember the famous thing about, do we have a monarchy or democracy? And it's a democracy if you can keep it.
Right.
It's it requires an informed citizenry.
Yeah.
It requires us to acknowledge that our opponents won, and we're okay with that. We're not happy, maybe, but hey, you won fair and square, so we'll get you next time. Here's the key to the Oval Office. Here's and that's not human nature. Human nature is, yeah, but I want to win.
Yeah. Well,
I want to win.
Well, I think wanting to win, and I listen, politicians are politicians, and I think it's interesting because I think your dad dually believed in America as an idea very much, but also wanted to win. And you talk in the book about that painful moment when he's barely edged out by Gerald Ford in '76, and how he went to the podium and just he wasn't happy having been a winner, and understandably coming from that place, but I also know that, and I couldn't find where it was, but in the early 80s at some point, Bill Sapphire, then at the New York Times, famously a Nixon speechwriter, said that Reagan had turned to a group of his advisors in the first term vis-a-vis the religious right, which he had actually Carter really brought them in, but he capitalized on it, and said, we'll jolly them along. He was never going to do the religious stuff. Again, some of you, liberals will make and say, oh, he aided and abetted all this. And yes and no. I mean, He certainly wasn't going to overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, the school prayer amendment died. A lot of it was window dressing, and he was largely pro-choice as governor of California. I mean, was this Reagan, the politician? I mean, was he really at heart? I mean, yes, he was a conservative, but in a kind of old-fashioned small c way, not a religious conservative.
Well, he was
before that information, jolly them along. Have you heard that before? Have you?
The phrase "jolly them along."
No. Bill Sapphire's.
I didn't remember that from Bill Sapphire, but he's not wrong about that. I mean, my father personally was anti-choice, but it never came up really in his life.
No.
And he understood, I think, that both his wife and her mother might have torn him a new one if he'd been a little too actively anti-choice.
Wasn't your mother, like many Republican first ladies, pro-choice, didn't sit?
Well, I think, yes, in her heart of hearts, she would have been pro-choice. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as would her mother have been, Edie, who was a real pistol. She and my father used to swap dirty jokes all the time, and so yes, in his heart he didn't. Abortion made him squeamish, and understandably, that's fine. But he was not going to go out and get on a soapbox about it. That's just that kind of social issue stuff. The anti-gay.
No,
it just had gay friends. It was just. From
Hollywood,
I'd say.
Absolutely. I mean,
would pander at times to those people. Would say things that they wanted to hear, even if he wasn't going to do anything that they wanted him to do. Exactly, he would make them think that he was on their side when really he was only sort of half on their side.
Right. There is a wonderful new book out. By a guy who's a professor now at UF. He used to be at Texas, called The Peacemaker, how Ronald Reagan, it's not how Ronald Reagan won the Cold War. It is called, anyway, it's called The Peacemaker. I had him on the show. Mm-hmm. And to the point of Ronald Reagan being a very shrewd operator. Obviously, he's the ardent anti-communist, he runs on that, America's feeling about itself post-Vietnam and Watergate and the Soviet Union's creeping aggression, though he knew it was kind of a paper tiger, was part of his whole thing. And the book argues that though he came into office as a, and the evil empire to the ash heap of history and all that stuff. You know, he ended up being quite the diplomat. As you write about in the book, he was, and I don't think conservatives of any, or whoever they are, whatever these conservatives call themselves today, have any idea how committed he was to the abolition of nuclear weapons and how much diplomacy took place, and where he really became a statesman. And if he was, he already was, but he used the peacemaker Ronald Reagan, the Cold War, and the World on the Brink. That's what it's called, by William Inboden. He's on the show. You should listen to it. Penguin published it. Reagan had that ability, you know, and then again earned the ire of the right at the time, Bill Buckley and all his friends. How could you do this? A lot like Nixon did when he went and changed the world, I think, for the better by meeting with Mao. You know, so Reagan plays in a little bit of Reagan's ability to, you know, fool you a little bit. The wink and the nod made you believe he was just, you know, simpler than he really was.
Yeah, he was somewhat naive in some respects, and he also had a very kind of, you know, I'll use the word childlike, and I don't mean it in a pejorative way, a view of the world in that, just like a child might say, well, boy, you know, we've all got these big bombs that can destroy the planet. Maybe we should get rid of them. You know, well, yeah, that would be a good idea if you could do it, at least reduce their number tremendously. And he was kind of obsessed with this for quite some time. Back in '76, when he got up, having lost to Ford at the convention, what is the crux of his remarks? Driving down the coast of California, the time capsule that he's participated in. When it's open, we will know whether we have succeeded in saving the world from nuclear holocaust. So this was on his mind even back in '76. By the time he gets to the White House and can actually do something about it, well, there's a lot of other stuff going on in the first term, but second term comes, and, you know, a succession of Soviet leaders, as he said, died on me. You know, there was nobody to talk to.
Three died, right? Brezhnev, Andropov, and Chelenko, right?
Yeah, they all die. In the first 4 years of his administration, boom, 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 they all go. So nobody, again, a lot of chaos over there and nobody to talk to. But then along comes Gorbachev, who, you know, has a very sophisticated sense of what's going on, obviously, in the Soviet Union, and realizes that economically they just can't do this, you know, anymore. Changes need to be made, fundamental changes. And my father perceives that this is a guy I can actually deal with. And we could actually, you know, reduce the number of nuclear weapons. And they did, first time that it had happened. So that's, you know, you got to like that.
Oh, sure. I mean, and again, I think that we saw, and you mentioned Newt Gingrich, you know, as it relates to the Reagan era too, again, because it's a time of my life I've lived in. Well, that makes no sense what I just said. I lived through this. So, I mean, and I was younger, but where I am now and being a student of this my whole life, you know, there was a hardening of politics in the Gingrich era and beyond. And not to suggest that Reagan didn't bring in some crazies, but you know, the scorched earth policy, right, of a Gingrich, who was a backbencher, giving speeches to an empty House of Representatives, carrying on about a McGovern communist government and all this crazy stuff, you know, really hardened in the 90s, you know, where policies, some of which were borrowed from Reagan, but also, again, coalesced around, we're angry we've been out of power, so we're going to implement the following things. Mm-hmm. You know? And Bill Clinton got elected. How dare he? Because it was 12 years of Republican rule in the White House. And we thought we'd never see that again because we thought Jimmy Carter was the last Democratic president. Or at least that was the prevailing idea. You know, and then in comes in Bill Clinton with two big wins, you know, winning the South again and winning Ohio and Missouri. I mean, Montana. I mean, it's unbelievable, this electoral map. It's literally another era, you know. And they were, you know, more than chafing at it. And with that came a caustic nature that I think you see go all the way through to Trump, you know. And that, but how about the fact, though, Ron, that the deep, I mean, you could even call it, I mean, books were full of hagiography, which I've written, this like obsessive veneration, maybe is the word or the term for your dad, which was like you could never say a bad word about Ronald Reagan, and now it's Donald Trump. I mean, that you're saying Reagan, it's like, well, that was yesterday. Reagan is yesterday. You know, we don't. That's not what we're talking about anymore. Isn't that in your lifetime? I mean, I know you probably thought some of that veneration was obscene, but I mean, you know, now it's like to invoke Reagan is, well, the left loves to invoke him because they say it's all his fault, every last thing, and the right doesn't view him as particularly important in their movement, at least now.
Well, he isn't now.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he would have nothing to do with today's Republican Party. He was just, I mean, who are these people after these spineless, simpering, you know, people? How lacking in dignity and self-respect do you have to be to troop down to Mar-a-Lago or to a courtroom in Manhattan and smooch Donald Trump's ass? I mean, really, have you no pride, no self-respect whatsoever? These are people, too, that have been insulted terribly by him, sometimes their spouses being their wives.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Ted Cruz and his wife. I mean, you know, not that I really care what Donald Trump has to say about me or, you know, anything else, frankly, you know, don't.
He attacked you? Donald Trump attacked you?
No, I don't think so. But if he did, why would I even care? At the same time, it's a matter of principle. You're running against the guy in a political race, and he goes after your wife in really personal terms.
Right.
I mean, I got to say, the next time we were on stage at a debate, he ends up on his ass. You know, I mean, sorry, you don't do that. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I got into a discussion, and there's obviously wonderful clips from your dad with the Immigration Reform Act of '86 and giving amnesty to people that had come here. I grew up in Miami, so obviously a huge Latino and specifically Cuban American community, but not exclusively, people who had revered Reagan because they got their citizenship under him and you know, believed in his view of whoever wants to come here and call this city on a hill its home, that would be great. And I got into a squabble with somebody, it was a couple of years ago, about what Reagan said about immigration, because I do believe it's a separate show. We have to deal with asylum law and the border policy is a disaster, but not because I'm not for immigration. I mean, in other words, I'm not approaching it from a nativist, xenophobic point of view. They could not believe I sent them this clip and said, it's not the same thing, and Reagan sold the country out. This is a MAGA person or a Trump person. They were officially MAGA. And immigration's a disaster. And, you know, and so the entire creedal idea that your father did subscribe to, bye, because we're angry now, or because Trump told us to hate people, or we're just so pissed off that, I mean, by the way, this person wasn't even from a border state anyway, but anyway, so interesting. Right?
This great replacement theory stuff that people like Tucker Carlson were peddling on, you know, on Fox and others, of course, as well, that there's some deliberate plot by Democrats to have a bunch of people from south of the border come here illegally and then somehow vote. You know, to take, and George Soros, of course, is inevitably involved in this because you got to get some anti-Semitism in there too when you're these folks. You're going to be a homophobe, you're going to be a misogynist, you're going to be a racist, but it's no fun unless you also get the anti-Semitism in there too.
Right.
Well, George, for some weird reason, wants to move a bunch of Hispanics into America, have them vote for Joe Biden, I guess, and then do what? You know, what's
and listen, I know I can count on you for your honest commentary, and obviously you are on the left. I like that. As I said, I don't know where I am because I'm politically homeless. I'm just not on the left, so I'm going to be in my homeless encampment out here somewhere. We're looking at another fateful election, and we hear this all the. Not that it's. I mean, it doesn't. It sounds like hyperbole, but it isn't. Yet another existential election. This is the most important election of our lifetime. I feel like we say this every 4 years, but it is true.
This time it's really true. Yeah.
It's really true. So obviously, look, you know, I'm a never Trumper, so I'm voting for Biden. I'm not. I think Joe Biden is a very weak president for a number of reasons, but I don't care. I don't have a. What's that?
You've gotten a few things done. You know,
sure.
You know, climate stuff. It's, you know.
Sure. I mean, I don't believe that. I think he's passed a lot of excessive spending and bills that I don't think will do very much. I think his performance on the world stage is very weak, but it's okay. I voted for him. I'm going to vote for him again.
NATO together for Ukraine.
He did. He did.
Gaza and Netanyahu. That's a no-win situation there.
Well,
for what?
No. I don't. It's not that I blame Biden. I just think Biden and his team are. I don't like Anthony Blinken. I just think it's a naive group of people. That's okay. I have a disagreement on their policies, on their view. I would take Ronald Reagan any day. I mean, please. This crowd is lost, but I'm voting for them. Okay.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
the alternative is what? The crazy guy.
And I like Joe Biden personally. I do think. Oh, he is. Oh, yes. He's a decent man. I do think he's too old. Trump is too old, too. I'm not saying that. Right.
Too old. There's nothing you can do about that. If I have to hear about Biden's age one more time,
I'm just reflecting how good people are viewing it. Again, you and I don't represent the average voter who's going to go decide this election because we're not on the fence.
As long as when you say Biden is too old, you also add, and Trump is insane.
Trump is a mental patient. I say it. My show is a never try.
The guy who's a little too old, or the guy who really in a rubber room. I mean,
listen, Ron, I have 150 episodes talking about rubbing sandpaper on my eye, and before I vote for Donald Trump. There's not even a debate about it. Yeah. By the way, and I did like to give Biden for the Biden. I did like chips and science and the infrastructure bill. So there's things I liked. I'm in the middle. I mean, but I'm not on board with everything. Okay, but that's okay. We don't have to agree. By the way, this is my thing about your dad when I say to liberals. You don't have to agree with every single thing he did. But to say the entire legacy, but most presidents, maybe Andrew Johnson, Donald Trump, James Buchanan, most presidents have a legacy where you can point to some very good things and some things that, didn't go so well. I think there were a lot of problems in your father's second term. Obviously, we now know that he was not. This Contra thing was a disaster, and no question. And
or there's lying us into a war we didn't need to fight. George W. Bush. Then torturing captives, which didn't use.
I'm not a fan. Listen, I'm not a fan of George W. Bush. I have never voted in my lifetime, as I said, for a Republican for the presidency. I've not had the opportunity to. I've never found anybody that I thought, in the choices that I make. Again, I was a Democrat, but I said, again, I never liked, for example, I've never liked John Kerry particularly. I find him to be pompous and smug and ineffective. I voted for him. I certainly voted for Al Gore. I like Bill Clinton was my favorite Democrat. I voted for Barack Obama twice. I think his second term in retrospect was really problematic. And I think he's deeply overrated in retrospect. But I voted for him.
History will judge. Yes.
I voted for him. I mean, that's the thing. People, I anger my progressive friends, but I'm still voting with them half the time. So they can't get that angry at me. Yeah,
but vote for this guy.
Well, I mean, and then now there was no way I was voting for Donald Trump, in either time. So in this election, I know you don't really do punditry because you're deeper and better than that. But don't you have fears though that Trump could win again? I mean, that's not an unfounded fear.
Yeah, no, it's not because of our electoral college system. He's never going to win the popular vote, but consider that the first time around, Hillary Clinton wins by close to 3 million votes in the popular vote. Donald Trump gets, I think it was 306 electoral college votes.
Yeah.
I believe that was the
right on the nose.
Yeah.
Not the 49 states your dad won.
So loses by 3 million. Gets the 306 electoral votes for the victory. Along comes Biden, wins by 7 million and gets 306 electoral votes.
Right.
So there's a 10 million, swing there. This is a built-in advantage, seems to me, for Republicans. And it really only comes down to this handful of states and some tens of thousands of voters. So, if I don't know, black voters are a little, upset because things aren't going, the way they think it should be. Or young voters, who are all twisted up about Gaza, decide that it's all Joe Biden's fault. And I'll tell you what, I'm not going to vote for him. That'll show everybody. and you got to end up with Trump. Why? You think Trump is going to be, better with Gaza? Is he not just going to say to Netanyahu, you do whatever you want to do? Netanyahu is one of his kind of guys, a corrupt autocrat. So, I don't know, it could go south is what I'm saying. He could, in fact, win again in the Electoral College, and that would be a disaster for this country. What's going to happen in Ukraine? I bet Vladimir Putin rolls right over Ukraine at that point.
Yeah. No, I mean, the other thing I always say to people, well, first of all, presidents don't control gas prices. And there's a lot of, energy is a global thing too, even though we actually are we are a net exporter of oil now for the first time.
And natural gas, largest.
Right. And I've defended Biden on that from the right, saying you guys are just talking, your talking points just don't fly. I mean, they fly for your cult, but they don't fly. But that being said, I think people, and I don't like when what I don't like about where I think our politics gets childish too, and really bothers me is then when if there's a good economy under Trump, oh, well, that's not his doing. Okay, well, you can't have it both ways. Either presidents have an impact or they don't have an impact. That being said, the idea that people think that Trump getting elected, just on a basic legislative level, is going to lower your inflation and lower your gas. I mean, it's congenitally stupid.
Well, it is. He certainly raised our debt with his big tax, 83% of which went to the top 1%.
Right.
And you wonder about all these working class blue collar folks in the Rust Belt who are talking about that, they got a tax cut under Trump. Yeah. Well, what was it, a penny or two off your, you think, who really got a tax cut was the Jeff Bezoses and, Elon Musks of the world. They got a real big tax cut. And why these people don't understand that and see that, I guess they're just not paying attention. And it doesn't really matter. If I say that to them, if I repeat this, it's a lie. It's not true. Right. You're just one of the elite. You're in the other tribe, and we don't believe anything you say. This country is coming apart.
Yes,
like it hasn't since the Civil War.
Yeah.
We're not going to have a civil war like we did back then.
Right.
But no matter what happens in this election, I think there's going to be violence afterwards. Certainly if Trump loses, we've seen that act before. But if he wins, he's going to start doing things that people on the left are really going to object to.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, January 6th alone, even if I had supported him, I absolutely did not, is unforgivable. I mean, it was your father who famously said the 4-year transfer of power is a miracle. It is. Yeah, it is that we've been able to do this, but for Trump for 240 years or 35 years, that it's amazing. I want to switch gears for a second now to all things Reagan. So your sister has now written a few editorials for the New York Times, which is a book coming out, but she's spoke out against sort of the cruelty and the scorched earth nature of this country. And it's obviously, I think she always think she was really never a Republican, was she? I don't think so. I mean,
I don't think either of us were.
Neither of you were. Are you guys, what's going on in the Reagan world? Like, how's Patty doing? How's everything?
She's fine. She just wishes my birthday today. So she wished me.
Today's your birthday?
It is.
You buried the lead. Happy birthday. Come on, Ron.
So she's doing fine. Yes, she's got a new book out. Congratulations for that. And I saw a couple of pieces in the New York Times recently on the op-ed page. Yeah, she's like me, she's disgusted with today's Republican Party. She would be, even if we weren't the children of the father we are. So she's speaking out for that, and good for her. Yeah. Right.
And were you solo I think you were in the writing of your book when you went to Tampico and you learned about Nellie and Jack? You did that all alone, right? You never went with family members or yeah. I mean, that must have been such a catharsis in a lot of ways for your siblings, right?
Well, it was interesting, of course. Unfortunately, my brother, Mike, takes a dim view of anything that I do. So,
and he was very critical of parts of it. But do you talk to Michael? Is that?
Oh, no, we don't.
No.
He does not want to actually address these issues that he thinks he has with me directly, because I think he knows how that would go. So,
is he defending Trump? I don't follow him.
No, I don't think he does. He's had some health issues recently, I believe, and so he's not really doing a lot as far as I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was at the time the book came out, he decided that he would claim that I said that my father was suffering from Alzheimer's dementia while he was in office, and many of his decisions were really as a result of being non-compos mentis, and in fact, I said the opposite.
Yeah, that's not what the book says at all. But by the way, if I can point to this, not to invade the family squabble here, I think that goes back to what I'm saying, in an era where the book came out, right, with that obsessive narration of all things Reagan, and he's the son of Ronald Reagan. It was more about you saying anything. He misrepresented what you said, but you criticizing anything would be blasphemy. It was a sort of own the anti-Reagan view in that time.
Yeah, I mean, in Mike's case, he would have just found something else to complain about. And, the fact is, I was simply in a sentence or two just acknowledged scientific reality. Dr. Ronald Peterson at the Mayo Clinic had done a study around that a little while before I did the book, which proved that Alzheimer's disease, you and I could have Alzheimer's right now.
Yeah.
The disease takes at least a decade or so to develop to the point where you get dementia, and it becomes observable, and that's usually when somebody is diagnosed. In late stage Alzheimer's, early stage moves much faster, but in late stage Alzheimer's, 10, maybe even 20 years. So Dr. Ronald Peterson was also my father's neurologist. Mm-hmm. So, I was merely stating the prevailing scientific medical wisdom at the time, that of course he must have had the disease when he was in office, but nobody saw any signs of dementia. That was later, 4 or 5 years after he left office, which makes sense on the usual Alzheimer's timeline. But that was easily misconstrued by somebody who wanted to misconstrue.
Yes. What was the most of your grandparents? What was the most, when you did all this research, what do you think the most revealing thing was about Jack and Nellie? I mean, you write so beautifully about so much, and I really want people to read this book. For those that don't, though, I want them to get a little bit more of a sense of what that was.
My grandfather, Jack Reagan, has always been described as an alcoholic, and it's certainly true that he drank at times and got himself in trouble drinking, lost jobs because of it. But then he would go long periods of time when he didn't drink. I'm not sure that he was actually an alcoholic as such. Again, remember back then, people drank a lot. Men in particular drank a lot.
That I heard a piece of history I never knew, speaking of drinking, that a lot of the reason of prohibition was that men were so often beating their wives. I mean, in other words, it came out of this sort of Jane Addams-y, sobriety, puritanical thing, that there was so much domestic violence that it was like, we have to stop legally selling alcohol. I never knew that.
I hadn't heard that particularly either, but, I believe it.
That's what your grandfather was doing, but I'm saying that was a reason alcoholism was attacked.
Yeah, I mean, even when I was a kid, there was still the 3-martini lunch.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The guy in the gray flannel suit, you go to lunch and get drunk, basically.
I don't know how people go to work all day and get drunk. I never understood it. Even I don't care what era it was. I don't get that.
I didn't get it either. So that the alcoholism thing, I think, was what was interesting too, was that, my father would tell stories about his father. The one famous story when he's coming home he has about a 10-year-old boy, and sees his father passed out on the front stoop of their house in full view of the neighborhood. And it's a chilly day, and he's sort of, the breath is, he's belching up the whiskey breath, and this cloud of vapor there. And my father tells the story where he kind of grabs Jack by the jacket, hauls him into the house, and then kind of gets him up the stairs and puts him to bed. And of course, says nothing to his mother when she comes home. I went to the house. I looked at the staircase. I noted that my father at age 10 was a little guy. He was undersized at that age. Jack was a pretty burly fella. He didn't pull him in. He didn't drag him up the stairs or anything like that. Jack probably got to his feet and staggered up, cursing, staggered up the stairs on his own. But that left Jack being a little bit too much of a character in the story that my father wanted to tell. That story was about my dad and his coming of age and realizing that he had to take responsibility for his drunken father at that point. And so Jack needed to be, in a sense, written out of the story. He needed to be turned into an object and not a subject in that story. And those kinds of things were interesting to me. My conclusion was that my father's character was largely forged, not in college, not on the football field, but on the riverbanks of the Rock River, where he was a lifeguard for 7 years, saved 77 people, starting when he was 15 years old. So 11 per summer would be about the average there. We think about this was starting at age 15. He was diving into a river and pulling grown men, some of whom bigger and stronger than he was for sure, out of that river over and over again. Probably once a week he would do this. This is how he sort of grew up as a teenager.
Yeah.
You remember being a teenager. Not sure how,
I'm so, not because I lacked for heroism. I just didn't experience that. I didn't have an opportunity to. I mean,
by the time he graduates from college, he saved 77 lives. That's got to do something to you.
I also was particularly moved back to the fraught subject of race relations in America, and they're always fraught, was him bringing the two teammates who were black back to the house because they couldn't stay at the hotel. Right. I know that you mentioned, or someone mentioned in the book, of course, it doesn't let the hotel clerk off the hook. And it doesn't. But again, we're looking at a time through history that it's not again about excusing it. We have to see it for what it was. That being said, he came in the house. Your father didn't even blanch.
Well,
grandfather, excuse me.
That was interesting to me because, how did he not know that the hotel wouldn't take the black players? He grew up in this town. This was Dixon. This was his town that they were stopping in.
Yeah.
So how is it that he didn't know? But then his impulse also to try and make this okay.
Yeah.
The best spin I put on it, excuse me a sec.
Sure.
Best spin I put on it is that he realized that if he did what the coach wanted him to do, which having found out that they could not stay in any hotel in town,
right,
then we'll sleep on the bus.
Right.
I imagine my father would have thought, well, if we go back and we sleep on the bus, all of us, the two black guys are going to know why. We're not fooling them. And so he thought maybe this will make it better for everybody if I just take them home, because I know I can do that. I'll just take them to my folks' house. It's not far there, and they won't mind, And indeed, they didn't. There was no questions asked there. It was black, white, whatever. It didn't matter to Nellie and Jack. So there you were. But it did, and continued in the telling later on, elide the fact that Dixon was a town that had the Klan in it and that was racist.
Oh yeah.
And, his brother's best friend was black, and they used to go to the movies together. But Moon, my father's brother, used to have to sit up in the balcony because that's the only place black people were allowed to sit in the theater. Yeah. Well, so everybody knows that this is what's going on here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the stories they're beautiful in a lot of ways and explain. It made me think of young Gerald Ford when he was a player at University of Michigan. There was a great biography came out last year by Richard Norton Smith called An Ordinary Man. We also had him on the show because I love presidential history, and he took up for the only black player on the team. for Ford, it was, you know, being a Grand Rapids, Michigan guy, being in the party of Lincoln and saying this is wrong. Mm. And there's almost something quaint about it, given where Republican politics went, but that's what they believed, or what Ford believed, you know. And I think your father was instilled with those values. He knew right from wrong. You know, policy is complicated, and how he reacted in later years and what he did is obviously for historians to you know, deal with. But it does speak to a certain personal characteristic that I think he had. I wanted to read, as we close out, some beautiful parts of the memoir here about your dad, and wonderful. You write, predictably, much of the attention showered on Dad these days, positive and negative, misses the mark. While it's true that many unfortunate political tendencies metastasized during the 80s, kowtowing to religious extremists, denigrating and ignoring empirical science, stoking irrational grassroots fears while cynically pandering to moneyed interest, they cannot all be attributed to Ronald Reagan. Those tendencies long predate him and became far more extreme after he left the scene. Beyond a fondness for non-intrusive government and top marginal tax rates, for most of his years in office was 50%, he had little in common with the rage-mongering infecting his party today, short-circuiting the functions of government, potentially the country into ruin, just to score political points by pinning the blame on the opposition, are tactics he would consider unpatriotic, not to mention undemocratic. Thought that was, you know, important. I mean, you wrote that in 2011, almost presaging and almost being real prophetic on what Trumpism would be coming. I mean, it is interesting. Huh?
I never could have believed in 2011 that we'd end up with a Donald Trump presidency. In fact, it wasn't until he secured the nomination the first time in 2016 that I really took it seriously. Before that, I was one of these people saying, yeah, go ahead, nominate Donald Trump to be president, nominate Bozo the Clown to be president, you know, because I couldn't believe that the American public would actually vote for this guy. And in fact, they didn't, but I hadn't factored in that electoral college.
Well, and back to the electoral college thing before we close out too, that what makes this also harrowing is that even though Biden wins by 7.5 million votes in a popular vote, but we don't do the popular vote here, 46,000, give or take, votes among 3 states, and Trump would have been reelected in 2020 after the absolute negligence and mismanagement of COVID.
Right. After trading foreign policy favors for, you know, dirt on Biden, the Zelensky.
400,000 people killed under his watch is what they say of because of COVID. I mean, you think about that still 75 million people still went again and said, after all of that, we will reelect you, or try to.
Yeah, and just we forget. I forget. I'm sure you forget some of the lunacy. Like during COVID, when he, remember at the very beginning when he wouldn't let that boat dock on the West Coast because 15,
people, you know, we have such short memories. People are not remembering what they did yesterday, which is why he's getting slightly more haloed. How about the disease will be gone by Easter? Remember that?
You know, when the sun comes out, it'll just go away, or maybe we can inject bleach, or maybe UV light up our behinds, or, you know, whatever he was, you know, it was just this lunatic stuff. His refusal to wear a mask at the mask factory. And then we find out later why that is. We find out later, why is he touring the mask factory? Everybody else has got their mask on but him. Yeah. So we find out from his assistant later on, after the fact, that it's because of the orange makeup.
Yeah.
A white mask, and she realizes his orange pancake will get all over it and it'll look like a mess. And she tells him that, and it's like, oh, well, the mask has got to go then because I got the pumpkin thing going here. You know?
I think one of the scarier things, and again, this is just my view because we all know him as a popular public figure and character. This does not mitigate or in any way leaven this guy's evil. But because Donald Trump is very funny, you know, I say he's Rodney Dangerfield meets Benito Mussolini. That's not excusing it, but he has an ability to be funny, and he has no sense of humor, but he has an ability to come off like a comedian. It makes it scarier. Like he can stand there and do this thing of, oh, the podium doesn't work. Who built this podium? What kind of country is this? And I know it sounds, yes, not to you or to me, but I think that sells. I think it sells. By the way, you used to go on air. I was going to ask you this too. It's a wide-ranging interview. We can jump from subject to subject. You used to go on air with a guy who worked for your father, Patrick J. Buchanan. Of course, he started Nixon. And this guy used to terrify me. And one of the things I used to be terrified by Pat Buchanan was he would say the most outrageous, appalling stuff and go, "Oh, Chris," and he would laugh. And then this sort of weird geniality would overcome him, and you'd forget, I think this guy's kind of an anti-Semite. I don't know. I didn't know him. Maybe he wasn't. I don't know. Certainly.
He certainly dabbled in Holocaust denial.
Yes, right. He took up for John Demanjic and all this stuff. And yes, but he would laugh. And it's not that Trump does it, but to me, there's something so scary about, the kind of clownish autocrat, because I think it goes down easier for people.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I guess we can be grateful that he doesn't have any real plans.
That's true. He's an undisciplined autocrat, right?
Yeah, he doesn't. He's not a. He's not a Stalin or a Hitler or something like that, where they've got a real agenda laid out. And then at first I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and the end result is going to be this. He's chaotic. It's all just about winning the day, winning the news cycle, and everybody look at me, and I'm so special. And he's got a narcissistic personality disorder, and these people are, they live with this deep, deep shame. They try to project strength, but really he's like the weakest human being I've ever seen in my life. He's just so fragile.
So fragile. Yeah. And, I think,
this person to have in a high office, not somebody who's, you'd almost rather have a Vladimir Putin sort of guy who's, he's terrible, he's awful, but he's got a certain confidence about what he's doing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's a former KGB killer. I mean,
he just ate. He just ate Trump for lunch. I mean, right from the get-go.
And so did Kim Jong-un. And when I've said to people, I interview everybody on the show. We welcome everybody on. I mean, I say everybody. We don't have Marjorie Taylor Greene, but we have had on a few Heritage Foundation people to help to sort of try to unpack some of the things. When they say, and this is the thing, it's both things can be true. I try to think things through critically. It can make, I contain multitudes, I guess, as Whitman would say. So yes, I can decry some of the things Joe Biden does, but also say that doesn't make Donald Trump anything but a complete nothing.
Job.
Whack job, but nothing burger, to use his word, on the world stage. A narcissist who was played like a fiddle by Putin and Kim Jong-un, which is why he famously said he got along with him. They saw him coming a million miles. And I said to these right-wing guys, I said, you guys think this is leadership. You're getting played, but so is this country. Wake up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Very good.
Yeah. I mean, I always say to people, you're misunderstanding the sociopath, to use your words here, and how that makes him very weak and susceptible to flattery, which then, he probably would and has just gone ahead and traded secrets, because why not?
Oh, right away. His first day, he invited Lavrov and the Russian ambassador and a Russian photographer into the Oval Office all alone and handed them Israel's secrets regarding terrorism.
Yeah, back in 2017, right when he got in, you mean, right? Yeah.
Just imagine how stupid they thought he was at that moment.
Now, Ron, here's the most important.
I can't believe that this idiot is doing this.
I know. Well, again, alas, here we are. But Ron, not to go back to the big news of the day, it's your 30th birthday today. Happy birthday. Yes. You look great. Given where you are on this another year around the sun here for Ron Regan, where do you feel about, what are you up to in your life? What do you want? You've done so much. Do you have a next chapter you're planning? Is there a Ron Regan show coming? Another book? No?
Well, who knows about another book or something, but this is the 36th anniversary of my 30th birthday.
There you go.
I'm of an age now, and I started working for a living when I was 18.
Right.
And I didn't go to college, you know. And
I thought you went to Yale for a second.
For like 3 months.
And then you joined the Joffrey. Amazing.
Yeah. So I've been working for a long time, and I decided at a certain point that, you know, I'll do what I want to do, not what somebody else wants me to do. I'm fortunate that I can, you know, afford to live a modest life, but without depending on a paycheck at this point. So, you know, I'm pretty happy about that. And we'll just see. I enjoy, you know, coming and talking to people like yourself, and you know, throwing my 2 cents in. But
I love it. We love to hear it, because we, you know, who wouldn't want to have you, folks? Ron Reagan Jr., the son of the 40th president of the United States. You bet it that he has.
I meant to correct you before. Yes. One thing my father did was he did not want his son to have a junior attached to his name, so he gave me a different middle name. He was Ronald Reagan. I'm Ronald Prescott Reagan, and therefore not actually a junior.
Oh, that's so. But God, I feel like half the time I see you referred to as Ron Jr. I don't.
Because people, it's an easy way to differentiate.
Oh yes, Ronald Prescott Reagan. Okay, we're going to alter the show notes. Ron Reagan. We will.
It's not a big deal, but
I don't matter. You're just Ron Reagan. You're Ronald Prescott Reagan. I mean, that's it. Get those down. Who's calling? I have a reservation, please. Hi, Ronald Reagan. Oh, Ronald Reagan. In this era, they won't even know this. You think he's around. You know, people don't know anything anymore. Ron, really been a pleasure. Stick around for a second, for a few minutes after the show. But is there any way or where people can find you on the socials now before we sign off?
No. That's something I don't do any social media. No, okay. And I'm much happier for it.
Yeah. You're going to be more. You're more grounded and more sane. That's yes. Your mental health is bubbled in the best way. Yeah. No, it's true. All right, Ron. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation. It's really a pleasure to have you folks. Make sure that if you haven't read My Father at 100, which came out in 2011, Ron Reagan's beautiful recollection and memoir on his dad, beautifully written. As I said, it's been a joy for everybody else listening. As always, I tell you all to stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe.